Suffering doesn't necessarily mean something bad. In fact, suffering can be good. Hello, this is Father Sunny, and welcome to another dose of Holy. Today I want to talk to you about suffering. Every human being in the world has to carry his or her own cross. Everyone has a piece or share of suffering. It is our participation in the suffering of Jesus Christ. And suffering could take many different forms. It could be something interior, spiritual suffering. It could be emotional suffering. It could also be relational suffering, where you're having trouble with the people around you. It could also be something more physical, disease, pain. Any type of suffering is real, and every human being has a share of each one of these. But we do have a share of this not because God doesn't love us. Our initial tendency when we have suffering is to run away from it because, it's a natural tendency for us to run away from something painful. It's a protective mechanism within us. But suffering doesn't necessarily mean something bad. In fact, suffering can be good. Think about it this way. When we suffer, it can build our character. People who go through suffering develop a sense of patience, a sense of inner strength, a sense of faith. Suffering doesn't have to mean we lose our faith. In fact, it is when we suffer that we are able to authenticate our faith, as it is in the midst of our suffering that we can choose to continue to follow the Lord and to embrace and trust that He is there in the midst of the suffering. When we suffer, according to St. Paul's teachings, as well as our general teaching about what Jesus' suffering means. When we participate in the suffering of Jesus Christ, when we share in the suffering of Jesus Christ, there is something salvific, something saving, something that is redemptive about our sufferings when we share in the suffering of Jesus. And so therefore, when we suffer, we have the opportunity to lift up our sufferings for the sake of others, and maybe for the sake of those that cannot pray for themselves. And number 4, when we suffer, it is during this time, I believe, that in a special way, God loves us even more. In the midst of the suffering, God looks upon us and sees the cross of Jesus in each one of us and says, "This is my beloved child." And so when you go through suffering, when you're tempted to complain or to maybe question why God is doing this, allowing this to happen to you, or simply waste yourself away in a little corner, depressed or unhappy and sulking, why don't we look at the suffering and find joy in the midst of that suffering? Because joy can happen in the midst of any other circumstance, including suffering. It's possible to suffer with joy. And that is my recommendation for everyone who asks me, what do I do now that I'm in the midst of the suffering? May you continue to be encouraged, just like all the martyrs of the church, just like the many holy people in the church who witnessed to us what suffering can do in our spiritual journey. Lift up your suffering to the Lord. Give thanks for the suffering and be a stronger Christian, empowering yourself in glorifying God through the sufferings. God bless you, and this is Father Sunny in another dose of Holy. Bye.